Welcome back to part 2 of setting up a Server 2016 cluster using SQL. So the first video, we created a cluster. We created a cluster using 2 nodes, and we set up some disks. And node 1 is now the owner of them. So we go here. Now what we want to do is we want to set up SQL on both nodes. So this way we can have a SQL cluster that will go between the 2 nodes if one should go down. So the first thing we need to do is go from documentation. So I created this little document many years ago, which we can go through and set up SQL as we're going through. We need to set up some prerequisites, which is folders. From this point, we will just carry these folders here. So what I did ahead of time is I went to the E drive on the active server, and as documented here, I created SQL instance, SQL shared x64, SQL shared x86, and then I went down to my the drives I will be using on the cluster as well. So this is a local apps disk on both servers, so we'll have to go to both servers to create this. On K, SQL data, I created a data folder, as you can see here, and then I created those 2 folders in the data folder. So you need to do that. And then we go back to L, which is our logs folder. We go to logs, create SQL logs, just like it says here. And we go to M and N as well. So you'll see on M, there they are, and N. Okay, so now let's go to node 2 and let's make storage failover. So let's move storage to 2. So we can see this. So on number 2, we have the storage, and you notice the folders are still there. But the E drive, we didn't. So I need to go back here and confirm what folders I will need. So we will go on the E drive, we need to create a folder. SQL instance. Second folder. SQL shared x64. And SQL shared x86. Okay, so we're on node 2 now. We want to go back to node 1. So I'm going to failover the storage back to node 1 to start the install. And the reason why you want to do this, because node 1 is your first node. So what we want to do now is we want to go to node 1 and start installing SQL. So we can close the cluster tool. Do that here as well. And we'll close this. Bring it back open. I've attached the DVD. So let's make sure we have the DVD installed on node 1. Node 1 DVD. There isn't one. So now let's attach our SQL CD to the image. So I have an SQL Server CD 2016. It's connected, and I'm going to click OK. And we're having a little bit of a delay here. So I will close this. Go back to server 2, or the domain controller, sorry. Let's go back to node 2 here and make sure we have the CD installed. Just need to hook up my second drive. There we are. So I need to have this image connect, and we should be there. Let's go back here. DVD drive. Let's check to see that that image is there. So when you're doing VM, any type of virtualization, you want to definitely make sure you have your ISOs connected. My ISOs are running from a portable drive, and the portable drive I must have disconnected at one point in time. So we're having trouble doing that. So what we need to do is let's get a good start and give these things a reboot. Reboot node 2. Let's reboot node 1. Right. Now you can do it from within the OS as well, but I chose to do it that way. So I'm going to log on to the domain controller just to confirm everything's good. Active Directory is there. We're okay here. So now let's go back to node 1, make sure we're there. Make sure we have our CD installed. There it is there. It's connected. Let's log in. Okay, so we're logged in now, and let's just confirm. CD image is there, and for some reason the image is not there. So the next step would be, let's just make sure we have this again. Removable devices, disconnect. Removable devices, connect. There we go. Sometimes you just have to connect and disconnect. So there you go. So now we have SQL. What we want to do, by following the documentation, we should run it as administrator. That's a good step, especially with Windows Server 2016. You definitely want to have this installation run the best it can. So let's run it as administrator. And minimize this, and let's start with the setup. It's the usual setup. Let's go to installation. And now, normal installation, you would do a standalone, but we want to do a failover cluster. So let's start here. New SQL Server failover cluster installation. Okay. Now, I don't really care to update, but you should update. Okay. Critical update. It's going to go get this. So we can let it go ahead and get this critical update. Now, if you don't have internet access on your server, you're doing a demo test or a lab test like I'm doing. If you don't have internet access, it won't go out and get the patch file. So you let the install just go through its steps. Now we can minimize this one, so you just have this one up. Here we go. For the most part, during the install, it's going to be a lot of waiting for the CD to catch up or the files to be copied and so forth. So when you run your tests, it's going to come up and mention about firewall. You need to make sure you have your ports for your SQL. Port 1433 is default, and you have dynamic ports as well. You should make sure you're well aware of those ports. Put them into Windows Firewall. So what usually happens is you go to Windows Firewall and you go Advanced, Inbound Rules, and I usually just add a rule, port. Now in live production, I recommend you don't use the default port because things like SQL Slammer, if it's still around out there, could potentially get to your server. And because 1433 is a default port, most people know about it. So if there's any infiltration into your systems, default ports is the way they get in. So you should use a different port. But for now, again, this is a lab. Let's just allow it. And let's call this SQL. Usually I put a pile of ports in to do this. But for testing and demonstration, this is all we need. So now you have to copy this firewall rule to the other machine as well. So if we rerun, this is the only one we get now, right? Windows Firewall and MSCS. So we could leave this alone for now. Let's just go ahead. So now what we want is database engine. I don't need any reporting. I'm going to put client tools, backward compatibility. It's whichever you prefer you need. Now, here is the part of the installation. See how this the instance root directory right here. So we want to change this to E. SQL instance. Click OK. The feature, that's a 64-bit. So we want to put this over to x64. And of course the x86, we want to change that to be x86. So that's that settings there. That will match here. Okay, check database engine, replication, full text options. If that's what you need, this is just meant to be just a basic. Sometimes you may need these things, right? Replication. So I'm just choosing the basics for now. If there's anything else you need to add, you can always do that. This is really what I just add just for testing. So now we've got what we need. We go next. And now they want to know network name. So the SQL network name, what do we want to call the cluster? So I want to call this DB test. That's just what I'm calling it. I'll leave this. You can do a named instance if you prefer and an instance ID. I'm going to leave this default for now. So as you see now, it's going to install in the proper directory. I will go next. Now where this is important is I'll bring up the domain controller to show you what happens here. So under our domain, DB cluster, remember that was set up by the cluster itself. So I'm going back to node 1 and it says the cluster group available storage is reserved. See if we can get that whole available storage is reserved. It cannot be used as SQL group. Okay, cluster group is okay. So now we need to go back, and so let's do DB test 2016 next. Well, what we'll do is just skip this for a second. Available storage is reserved for Windows failover clustering, cannot be used as, right. So the available storage is reserved for failover clustering. That's the other disks we have. So let's just wait a minute here. So let's choose this, right? Create a new cluster. So we're going to create a new cluster. Let's go next. And now what we want to do is we want to choose the disks, right? So the quorum can't be used. That's why the error come up. SQL backup, SQL data, SQL logs, and SQL temp. Those are all the disks in the cluster that we're choosing. See, when we did the previous one, said it couldn't just auto choose because there's more than one. And one disk you can't use, which is the quorum. We don't want to use that in the cluster. We just want these. So that's why the error was there. So let's say next, because we want all those disks as part of this cluster. Right? We want to use an address. So now what we need to do is choose IP4, and we have to have an address. So right now we need to see if we have a free address. So let's ping 192.168.0.13. That's used. How about 14? 14 doesn't look to be used. So let's kill it and type in 192.168.0.14, right? And cluster network 1, we can leave it there. Now what we can do here is the SQL Server agent. Let's choose drop down browse, and let's go find. So now what we might want to do is create an account called agent. So we need to create an account called agent and database engine. So let's go to the domain controller now, and let's make users. So we want to go Active Directories, users, and computers. And you want, now you can create local accounts on your servers if you wish, but it's just easier just to do it on here. So from here, we want to create a user, and we'll call it DB agent. DB agent. If you have a naming standard, it's good to use it. I'm just using a test. So we also want to make this password never expire. Again, depending on your rules, if this changes password, it will crash the service. So we probably don't want to do this. So DB agent, and now we want to create a user. Name DB engine. Same thing. Make it not expire for now. Now we have the DB agent and DB engine. Let's go back to node 1. And now we want to choose DB agent. Check. There it is. And the password. And then here we want to choose DB engine. So we're going to browse again. DB engine. And there we go. And type in the password. And what we want to do now is click next. So the agent and the engine are starting up with an account we set up, an AD. And what we want to do here is make a mixed mode. Depending on how you want to do it, if you just want to do Windows authentication, you could do that. So if you don't have an SA password. So what we can do is, let's do add current user. So I'm on there. And let's also make a SA password as well. And then before you click next, you want to click on data directories. And this is where you get to here. So your data directories. So the data root should be K SQLDB. So we're going to K SQLDB. And then we want the user database directory. should be KSQL data. So let's go here, KSQL data. Okay, and then we want the log directory to be SQL logs on L. This is why those drives. If you keep it separate in different drives, you could then make life easy for yourself. So now you're aiming everything at different directories. This way your directories don't get full. The data's in one, logs in the other, and you're good. Now, so backup, what we want to do is change that backup to the backup drive. So now we have everything there. Now we want to go to temp. Now the temp is these temp folders over here, right here. So you got the data and logs. So here, the data, we want to add in temp. We want to go to data. And we want to remove the default. And here, we want to change this to temp log. So we have data and log there. We have our other folder set up. And now let's click next. And if we go ahead and pull up the folder structure, you can see now information is going to be installed in these folders. So we will go over to here, apps, so SQL instance, nothing there yet, nothing there because we're not installing yet, right? So what we want to do is let's go back out and let's watch this do. So this is all the changes we're asking for, and this is where it will install the configuration file, which is mentioned up here. Right here. So ready to install, it tells you this information. And that's it. Now we go install. So really this document just goes through the whole install procedure, each window you go to. And when you get alerts and things, you now know what they are. So some of the errors that we see were, like for instance, it checks for disks and it says no, the quorum can't be used. Of course it can't. It's too small for one, and it's a quorum disk. We don't want to use that for anything. That's just for the maintenance of the cluster itself. So I'll minimize this document. Now we don't need it. And we'll watch the install go through. As you will see, we will start seeing some data populate here shortly. So while it goes through the install, it's putting all the files where we need them. We need to go and make an SQL role on the other server. So let's go to the second server. Let's log in. Let's go to the firewall. Advanced. Inbound. New. We want to do a port rule. 1433 is what we decided on. Allow connection and SQL. Finish. So we have both servers have their rules now. Server 1 has the rule. We can get rid of that. And we're watching it install. It's going pretty good now. Let's move it around here. There you go. So SQL shared is starting to get populated. So is SQL A6, and the instance should be populated shortly. Just leave that up. So the install is definitely proceeding through well. Now once the first server is installed, now we just go into the second server and install the second node, which I will show you once this is complete. So there's our cluster. Node 1 and 2 are still up. Number 1 is the owner of the disks for right now. And let's let this carry on. Now, I'm not a DBA by any stretch of the imagination. I just have done several of these installs to help other people over the years, and just thought maybe I'd make a video because a lot of people have not done clustering and don't have a organized fashion of setting one up. So this is why I'm sharing this video. Hopefully the audio is better than the last one I created, but this method I use will show you how to actually do this. So while we're waiting for the install to finish, we'll go through a little more information of the domain controller. So on the domain controller, what I did from the first video is I created 2 volumes to use iSCSI. So if you take a look on here, these disks, these are the actual disks being shared out by iSCSI to the cluster. So as you see, those disks there. I didn't show that in the last video of how it looks. So the source server of the iSCSI sharing of the disks, this is just basically virtual disks sitting on a Windows folder, a hard drive. So if I wanted to back these up, I could back up these disks onto a different machine or onto tape or out to cloud or something, and that would preserve my disks for my install and my servers. So that's really what I'm doing here. I'm just sharing this, using this as my iSCSI targets, as done in the first video. So, and then we have the accounts that we created. And also in DNS, you'll notice that the DB cluster is there, DC node 1 and 2, but you should see, once it's all done, you should see that node I created. So I will go into here, computers, see how we have the DB cluster. There will be another node show up once we're done. So it's just about done. And as you can see, the folders have all been created. Let's go in here, data, has some data, nothing there yet. DB has something there, it's getting there. So here we are, we're done. Everything's installed, let's close. And now we have node 1 set up with SQL. Now, of course, we need to install a client. If you decide to put the client on the server, then you can put the SQL client on the server so you can open up the database, do all your maintenance from here. Usually, it's recommended to run it from another machine, because if you run it on the server while it's doing all of its processing of the database and the disk activity and everything, you're adding to the CPU usage on the server. So my guess is they don't include the client now with this, because many people were putting it on the server. It doesn't need to be here. You could use it from your PC, which I'll create another video. I guess I'll call it video 3 if we need to, but we'll append this video with that information. So now that we have SQL installed, let's go to node 2, and or actually what we can do is you just go on node 1 and we can go here. We have the CD, so let's go to node 2. And on node 2, we're going to pull up the CD as well. Right? It's not there. Let's disconnect and reconnect it. So let's go to CD. Let's disconnect it. And then reconnect it. It's almost like ejecting and putting it back in. Okay. Click OK. And there you go. So again, let's right click on it. Run as administrator. Get rid of these windows just for clarity here. So again, the setup will come up. Takes a few seconds for it to go through this little process to get you to the window. And now we're going to click on installation. And this time we want to add a node to SQL Failover cluster. So the first time we did this, now we're going to add a node. So let's add a node. Okay. Accept the terms. And now it's going to go check. I don't want to do any updates. It'll make me do the one. So next. It's going through preparing its setup files. And now it's going to install the patch. While we're waiting for this, I guess a lot of people who make these videos, they like to play music in the background, and my videos seem to have a little silence in them when there's not much more to talk about while we wait. I try not to leave too much silence, and also don't like to ramble too much if I can on the video. I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to. So here we are. I'm going to minimize that because we don't need it. We're back to this. Well, if there's anything you'd like me to add to these videos, or any video you'd like to see, I could run through another video of anything you'd like to see installed. Please comment down below, and I will do whatever I need to do to get you up and running. So we have the same thing mentioned, right? If we click on warning, it's going to mention going to a website, right? Because we do enable the firewall on our server. It says you can't get there. So. And same with this, the cluster service. So we will fix that shortly. So now it's going to go, this is node 2, this is the server we have installed, and there's the DB test. So you see how it found it already. So let's say next. I'm just going to pop back to the domain controller while we're waiting and see if we have any updates here. And there you go. So there's the DB test computer account. That's for the setup. And let's go to DNS and see if DNS updated. And it did, DB test. So as long as you have the proper permissions, your Active Directory and your DNS will be updated by the cluster software. That's why you need to run as administrator to give it the most elevation while you're installing. And that's why you need to be an elevated account on your domain. So if you're not a domain admin, or you're not a high-level administrator of these areas, like if you haven't been given delegate control, you need to make sure you have that right to be able to create computer objects, and this computer object has to be able to create objects as well. That's how it creates these. That's why these were automatically created by the services. So I just wanted to show you that, just to reinforce that these are the things that people do miss. If they don't have permission to do it, you won't see these created and your cluster will not work. So let's go back to 2. Node 2 is showing the information we had put in previously. We're good with that. And now it wants to know the passwords of those accounts. So, because it's going to set up the services here. And the other 2 we never assigned, so we'll leave them. And now we're ready to add the node. So while that's going, let's go back to DC. So as I was saying, these accounts computer accounts were added to AD because of the cluster and because of this SQL cluster. So that's why they exist. And same with the DNS. So now we can actually ping db test. Sorry, db test 2016. And it will respond because it's been given an IP address. And same with db cluster. So these items were created by the clustering tools and the SQL cluster. Okay, so back here. And again, the grass is growing here, so we'll watch the install. Nothing there yet. There you go, your files are being installed. And this follows the same install as we have on the other node. It's just the difference is this one has no cluster disks. This one has the cluster disks. So when at any given time, if these disks fail over to the other node will be ready to run SQL. And you will not have any downtime. Now that's how we set up that. Now, I could also show you how to set up, we could set up file shares. So you could put a file share on here. And if you, let's say for instance, you have your, like a file server, you could put a share on here and then that share is always available according to the name of your cluster. So if you name the cluster file server, and anytime you go to file server, it doesn't matter which node it's on, it will still always get there. And that's how Hyper-V works. The Hyper-V also functions on a cluster as well. So when you fail over your disks or you have opposite storage, it will then go to each storage. That's how that works as well. So clustering is a very good thing to know how to do. This is just a crash course into it, not a in-depth, but I'm hoping I did provide enough information to get you up and running and to make you dangerous with it as I am. I'm by no means a database administrator. I play with it now and again. That's not my function, but I do know how to install it, and I do know how to kind of go through and troubleshoot a little bit of it. That's really where I come from on this. I just know how to set up these items because I do it partially for a living. So, and like I said, what we can do is we could track the a SQL client. So you can download the native client. You can also, right here, so actually SQL Management Studio, so SMSS. So I will download this right now, just to show you what it is. And we can include it in the video if it downloads fast enough. So let's go back to node 2, watch it finish while we download our SSMS. So SQL Studio Management, SQL Services Management, or sorry, SQL Server Management Studio. Mouthful. This tool will allow you to manage your SQL, so you can use actually SQL 2019 using this client as well. So once we get the client, we'll install it, and then you'll be all ready to go. Just gonna move it off to another monitor for a sec. So there you go, we have installed now. We've got it all installed. I'm going to look for my file. Okay, Still downloading. So we have to confirm here everything succeeded, and let's see what happens here. So the install is going to do its final completion here. So we have node 1 and we have node 2. So now we will pull up services. Oops. And just confirm services is running. And it looks like it is. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to drag SSMS. Oop. So I will drag it over here and I will run it. So we can minimize that now, bring this up. So it's going to take a few minutes here. So let's run it. And just bring it back on the screen. So it's going to go through a typical install of software. So we're going to install. Now sometimes this install is excruciatingly slow. So we will try and bring this up as best as possible. So I will drag it on here. So we have a copy on our VM. And we'll do the same thing here as well. I don't really want it on my desktop, but we'll see if it runs. So now we have SQL installed, both nodes. Both machines have a connection. So now let's open up the cluster and take a look at what's changed. Let's go to node 1. And let's open up the cluster tool. So now we have our roles. Now SQL has just put a role in. And we have our disks as well and our nodes. So when you install things like SQL Server, it will then put a role in here and run it. If you have a problem with this starting, it's usually a service account. Maybe the password's wrong. Maybe the drive access, it could be anything. So maybe during the install you had a failover happen and it wouldn't write properly. It may be that. So you might actually have to go back and reinstall. Been lucky this time to get through it. I've had times where I had the exact same setup and it's failed on me. So it's sometimes depending on what you're working with, it might be a hit and miss, which is not good, but it has happened. So as you see, node 1 is the carrier right now of everything. So we're good there. And you'll notice the networks. This is where we put the cluster network. So we click here, right? Network connections. We got one NIC on each machine. And that's what we have. So that's pretty much it. SQL cluster is all set up and ready to go. If you happen to have any errors, you can definitely go through. You see here one warning error. Let's go through what this warning is. Okay, computer object associated with the computer SQL could not be updated. The text for associated code. So unable to protect. So what we have to do there is basically what it's crying about is on your properties under delegate manage system. What it's crying about is there is a tab that says prevent accidental deletion. So in here, for instance, on the OU, there's usually a tab that says prevent accidental deletion. Well, we don't have that. I'm not worried about it because I'm not going to accidentally delete it, but you can go in and do have tabs where it says prevent accidental deletion. So I'm not too worried about that because I'm not going to delete, but that's what that is. So that's what that error is. So we can just reset and get rid of the error. because we know what it is. And let's see where we are with SSMC. So like I said, you generally don't want to install it on the server, but if your server is not going to be too busy, it's not going to hurt anything having it installed on the server itself. It's always a good idea to have the DBA installed on their machine, and they could remotely connect to the machines to do what they need to do. So there's the install going. Now it helps when you're running an SSD. It will be a little quicker install. So what we want to do now is what we mentioned earlier about the firewall. So let's go to firewall again, and let's find out what we need. So let's go to the built-in rules. Let's click change settings. So it mentioned about the cluster. So we have our failover cluster rules open. It allows us to go in, and we also have our SQL. So those rules are there. We're fine. Everything's working fine. What we want to find out now, once the SSMC is installed, we can actually go further. Let's go to SQL Server 2016 configuration. And in this configuration, we can see how it's set up. So for instance, native client, protocols, TCP IP, right? Default port 1433. You can change that port to anything you want. Just make sure when you're managing it from here, right, once this tool is installed, you need to connect to using that port, and you have to have your firewall open with that port too. So again, this is just a test environment, so I'm going to leave that alone. So you go to SQL network, protocols, same thing. This is the database we're actually working with. This is just the default client. So in the database we're working with, it says IP addresses. So again, 1433. That's IP1. We're using one IP, right? There's another IP there. So IP3 is this one, 1433. IP4, 1433. So as you see, the ports are all 1433. If you want dynamic ports, you can then put a set range of ports to have it go from. And then you'll have to have the same ports opened up in your firewall. So if you do change from the default, which I recommend you do, make sure you add your firewall port to allow it. And that's the same thing you'll get on the second server as well. Right, so there's your database we set up, the instance. Now you can also put multiple instances here and have different ports for each instance too if you prefer. As you see, exact same setup. So that takes care of that. Now the services, remember the ones we put in with our accounts? They're not by default. So let's make these accounts. Let's make these start automatically. And we want the agent automatically as well. But for now, let's start them up. Make sure they can run. Okay. But they're automatic. We'll let them sit. Now, we could just leave them as manual if we want. It doesn't matter. But we're good. It's fine. Right? It's not going to let it start because it's a cluster, right? Or node 2. You can't start there. So this is a good thing to show you. So we go to services here, and you'll notice they're running here, right? See how they're manual? So that was my mistake of going in and saying, hey, make these automatic. So let's go back and change these back to manual. The reason why they're manual is because we want the cluster to run them, not your services when you fire up the server, because you don't want them battling for a cluster that may or may not be on that same node. So we'll leave those as manual because we see everything running here. When we failed over, we'll see that running there. So let's leave that there and let's watch. Let's make this fail over. So let's see if this fails. So we want the role. want this. I want to say move role, select node. I want to move it to node 2. So it's coming down. You see the storage will start moving. Right, it's all over to node 2. Let's see if this role is up. Still pending because starting services. Let's go node 2. Let's pull up these services here. We should witness these things starting. There you go, they're running. So this is what a failover node does. Right, goes to node 2. Node 1 and 2 are still up, and role is there. And the services are here. Now node 1, they should be stopped. Right, let's refresh. And they're stopped. So that's what the cluster services will do. That's why it has to have the access it does. Okay, so our SSMC is installed now. Let's see if we can get to it. Right, SQL Server. So now we need to know how we get there. So because this is a cluster, so DB cluster is what we want to connect to. We don't want to connect to node 1 or 2, because if it's not running on node 2, then you'll get no connection. We need to connect to the DB test 2016. So while we're running this tool, starting up, I'm not sure why this tool is like growing grass, but it is. Okay, so server name, DB test 2016. And we want to use Windows authentication. I know my access is there, so I will connect. Now, if you want, you can say you can use the SA account. See, target principal name, not correct. So let's say DB cluster. Connect. So let's do this. And I forgot the name already. All right, 2016. Again, excuse me because I'm not a DBA. So now here's the problem right here. I've seen it right here. So what we want to do is, my computer is not on a domain, which is why it won't get there. Just caught this right now. So let's go back to DB test 2016. And let's change this to be SQL. Let's do SA. Just caught that. It's not very often I use this computer to do it. So we're connecting there using the SA. So we should be able to see DB test, and there it is. So if you're doing this from a computer not on your domain, you will have to use the SA account or an account in the database. So as you can see, here's the database we created. System databases right there, snapshot. So these are all the databases we created. So now here's the agent. Now watch this, security logins, right? CompuGuy. So that's how we prove we're in that database. So now let's do this. So let's leave this connected, right? We're going to leave this connected. Now let's go here to node 2. Let's bring this up here. Let's fail this over. So pending, let's look at the disks. The disks are gone to number 1. The node's up, and the role is still coming up. Remember, the services are stopped. They're starting. Change pending. There you go. They're up. So let's go back to node 2, and the cluster is up. And this didn't even skip a bit. It's expanding, still working, no problems. So that's it. That's how you do a cluster and SQL cluster running on 2 nodes in a virtual environment. Again, just do your checks if you're doing this for a production model. Name it properly, make sure you put your IP address properly, and you'll do fine with it. This has worked for me several times, and I've not had any issues with it. And virtualization, it should be no difference. Sometimes, depending on the virtual version you're using, you may find that sometimes it's not supported. That happened a few years ago. I was running vSphere 5 and it didn't support 2012 clustering, so we went physical. But now we're vSphere 6, 7, everything works fine. So this is how you do it. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, question, anything you'd like below. I will also share this document that I have. I'll try and post it up on my Google Drive and share it publicly, and I'll put the link to it on the video. Again, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe. See you next video.